Okay. It's a pleasure to introduce Matt Ingemanson. As you know, he is a past district governor, and he distinguished himself during his governorship by being what I call the governor of passion. He encouraged us all to follow our passions in Rotary, and it was quite an interesting year because we kind of, in a sense, self-determined what our service would be. He has followed his own passion, and that is the pursuit of peace. As I indicated in the write-up which accompanied the agenda today, Matt's formed a Grassroots Peacemaking Foundation, which is formally recognized as a foundation and has been working quietly, very steadily, with many representatives at the United Nations and other diplomats to give advice with regard to various conflicts which have occurred throughout the world. And this is a very special, personalized form of peacemaking. So it's a real pleasure to introduce to you past District Governor Matt Ingemanson, the chairman and founder of Grassroots Peacemaking Foundation, Inc. Take it away, Matt.
Thank you, Andy. First, I want to thank Andy because Andy has been very helpful in forming our foundation and get the 501c3 from the IRS. And together with Jerry Ploss, who is in the Portchester Rotary Club, their advice was invaluable because when I filled out this application, it was approved immediately, so they didn't go back and forth. So I just want to thank you for that. And now I'm going to set up the screen here, share the screen. And let's see here. Okay, looks like, okay, so Grassroots Peacemaking, this is our logo, is a paradigm shift in conflict resolution. And why is it a paradigm shift in conflict resolution? First, I'm going to go to the next, let's see here if I can get, yeah, here we are. You see, our philosophy is that everybody wins with peace, everybody loses with war. People who believe this are committed to peace for the simple reason that it's in their own self-interest to have peace. In the old days, people used to fight wars because they thought they could win. I never heard of anybody who started a war because they thought they could lose. So everybody thinks they can when they start a war.
Pretty good.
And I would appreciate if everybody could mute themselves so we don't have any sounds in the background. Anyway, so wars used to be win-lose games where the winner takes all and the loser loses all. But after the First World War, it's actually changed drastically, and the wars have become lose-lose games. I can give you an example. For example, when Bismarck invaded part of Denmark and acquired Schleswig-Holstein, that was a typical win. But when Saddam invaded Kuwait, it didn't work anymore. And actually Saddam ended up being executed. So it's a clear illustration that the game of war is not the same anymore. And in fact, if you look at the cost of wars lately, I'm just looking at the facts. Modern wars are expensive with no end in sight. And this is what America has spent on wars. We spent 2.26 trillion in Afghanistan, 1.9 trillion in Iraq, and 1.2 trillion in Syria, which adds up to 5.36 trillion. Plus we estimated 6 trillion in benefits to war veterans over the next 4 decades. more than 480,000 people have died. Another 10 million have been displaced. What have we gained by spending all this money? I would say that we haven't gained anything. I don't think anybody can say that we have anything to show for in Afghanistan or Iraq or Syria. And actually, so therefore, it doesn't work. Peacemaking in the front end only cost 1% of war in the back end. And how do you do peacemaking? Well, you talk to people and convince them that peace is a win-win. And the only possibility for peace is that everybody wins. And by the way, these pictures are from our lake outside my house. And I just put them in so the slides should look nice. But people at the grassroots level all want peace. And basically the leaders of some countries, some hostile countries may not want peace, but people at the grassroots level want peace because we are the ones that suffer from wars. So let's take an example here, Europe. Europe had wars for many, many centuries where different kings and princes were fighting each other. But since the formation of the European Union, they have experienced peace now in Europe since 1945. And they have the greatest prosperity in their history. And we're talking about old enemies like Germany and France and England, and they're all getting together now and working in developing their economy. So that shows that this actually works. Germany and Japan, in the Second World War, their philosophy was that they should conquer territories so they could secure their supply of raw materials. Since then, they're not allowed to have an army or a war industry. And now they have more prosperity because they built their economy based on peace. And actually, if they need raw material, they can buy it. They don't have to bomb and invade countries to secure raw materials. It's much more efficient if they buy the raw materials, and they have a much friendlier response. Vietnam and Laos, for example, millions of people died there 50 years ago. They now live in peace and build hotels and shopping malls. So it shows that, again, peace works much better than wars. And, you know, I'm not saying they love each other or are friendly, but, you know, it's in their self-interest to have peace. We have a formula for grassroots peacemaking in negotiating peace. First, the countries agree on the philosophy: everybody wins with peace, everybody loses with war. If you don't believe that in this, then of course, and one party thinks they can win a war, then of course you can't have peace because you have to defend yourself. But sooner or later, after they hit their head against the brick wall, they will come to the conclusion that wars are meaningless. And then, of course, they sit down and create a vision on win-win on how every party can benefit on peace and prosperity. And once you have agreed on that, then you develop a mission on how to implement the agreed vision. And once you've done that, you take action and carry out the mutually agreed vision. So these 4 steps will help the parties stay on the same page. Well, we think of North Korea as a very aggressive and hostile nation, and one of our big enemies. Now, they actually, here is a picture of Sandra and me. We met with the ambassador of North Korea, and I presented him with this philosophy. He read it very carefully and asked me if he could keep it, which of course he could. And North Korea now actually believes in peacemaking and believes in the 4-step method that we have here. And the same thing is we have been in contact with South Korea, and we are in regular contact with both North Korea and South Korea. And they also use the same method. And you may have noticed that in the last couple of years, there is less hostility between North and South Korea. In fact, it's unusually very quiet there. And that is because they are trying to work out their differences. I'm not saying that they are friends or live in brotherly love, but they simply have concluded that there is no benefit in killing each other. And we are supported by the United Nations. Here is Sandra and me together with the Secretary General Antonio Gutierrez. And here I was with the former Secretary Ban Ki-moon. And here I gave a speech at the United Nations. And here Sandra and I are together with the Nobel Prize laureate, Oscar Arias Sanchez. Well, it's not surprising that they are supportive of grassroots peacemaking, of course. But the Holy See is another supporter of us. The nuncio, the former nuncio, Bernardino Osa is together, reported directly to the Pope, but he also came to one of our breakfast meetings. He gave a speech, and here he welcomed me and Sandra to the prayer meeting for the opening of the United Nations. We also have good relationships with Congress. Here we are together with the Speaker, Nancy Pelosi. And believe it or not, the Islamic Republic of Iran, which also has a reputation for being a hostile enemy, they are supportive of grassroots peacemaking. And here is a Zoom meeting that we had last year where the ambassador of Iran came on and spoke to us about it. And actually, we've had conversations with the ambassador since then. And one of the results from that was that they started to negotiate with America about lifting getting back to the JCPOA. And I'm not saying that it's without friction, but at least it's less hostile, and they want to work in direction of peace. Palestine is, of course, the Middle East is another big conflict zone. The Palestinian ambassador, Mansour, has come to our breakfast meeting and, spoken there. And we also have good relationships with the people in Israel. And here we are together at breakfast meeting with the journalist Benny Avni. And he actually told us at the breakfast meeting that the Israeli intelligence service, Mossad, works together with the Palestinian intelligence service on protecting the life of President Abbas in Palestine. So you can say this is like a bad marriage, you know, the underpinnings are strong, but they fight all the time. I guess they can't live with each other and they can't live without each other. Here we met with a philosopher, Bernard Henri Levy, and he is also in agreement with the grassroots peacemaking. And here we have the Hasidic rabbi, Yaakov Cohen, who is a follower of Rebbe Schneerson. So now, of course, the Palestinians and Cohen doesn't agree on what kind of peace they want, but at least they agree that they would like to have peace. Serbia, Kosovo, the Balkans is also known to be a big conflict zone. And we visited Serbia. This is the Rotary Club of Belgrade, where, we also are very good friends with the former Council of General Tiuta, who's also a Rotarian. Now she's back in Kosovo, belonging to being part of the government there. But we were approached by Rotarians in Serbia if we could help them negotiate some kind of peace with Kosovo. And we have been having a dialogue with both of them. There's a lot of bitterness on both sides, but at least they don't kill each other anymore. And maybe over time they will work out their differences and live in peace. Taiwan, China is another problem. We had Taiwanese diplomats come to our meeting and explained exactly what was going on between Taiwan and China. Believe it or not, Taiwan and China are at war with each other, but Taiwan is the third biggest investor in China, and they basically and they had what was it, 700 planes going every week to between Taiwan and China. They had 1 million Chinese tourists. So these are two countries that were at war with each other. But they met with us a week later and said that there's a big movement in Taiwan to declare independence. And that is one of the things that Chiang Kai-shek and Mao were in agreement with, that there should be one China. They disagreed on what kind of China. So I said that to them. If you declare independence, then China will be very upset. So a month later, they came to me and said, well, we have a new policy. We would have a policy of status quo. We do not declare independence, and we do not pursue reunification. 2 months after that, the president of China and Taiwan met in Singapore and issued a statement that they would pursue their joint relationships based on status quo. So that started with us in New York. Ukraine is another problem area between Ukraine and Russia. Here is the Ukrainian ambassador came to one of our meetings, and this was right after the Russians had shot down a Malaysian plane over eastern Ukraine. But we had my classmate who was district governor in Vladivostok the same year I was governor, sent me a message saying that peacemaking would be great. I wish I could have been there. So I suggested, why don't you start a project between Rotarians in Ukraine and Rotarians in Russia? And she said, she's responded saying, I don't know, I can't promise anything. 3 days later, I heard on the news that Russia and Ukraine had agreed to withdraw their heavy weapons out of eastern Ukraine. So I was wondering how long that's going to last. So I waited about 6 weeks, and then it was Easter. So I sent her an Easter greeting, and I mentioned that I see that it's still quiet over there. And she responded back and said, I'm glad you noticed. And she invited us to a peace conference in Russia. So, and it's actually become less violent, even though there are substantial issues and differences between Ukraine and Russia. At least it's not as hostile as it was back in 2015. This is our international, this is where we have our breakfast meetings, and this is in the church center across the street from the United Nations. We have 4,800 members in 100 countries around the world in our Facebook group. And we all have the mission of creating a more peaceful world through grassroots peacemaking. Rotary is a very important organization for pursuing peace. In fact, Rotary is the world's biggest peacemaking organization. And Rotary is also one of the founders of the United Nations. And one of the difference between Rotary and the United Nations is that members of Rotary are people at the grassroots level, while the members of the United Nations are the nations. So the Secretary General, for example, has to deal with the leaders of each nation. And not every leader of a nation is in support of peace, while people at the grassroots level definitely are in support of peace. We have many friends at Rotary International. Here is the president of Rotary International, Shekhar Mehta. And here is the General Secretary, John Yuko. And we have Rotary International past president, Ravi Ravindran, who negotiates peace at Sri Lanka, his home country, with the Tamil Tigers. And here is Gary Huang, who is busy opening Rotary clubs in China. And of course, my old mentor, Luis Jai, and his wife, Celia. Luis was the one that inspired me to get involved with grassroots peacemaking, because I found out that he was involved in peacemaking between Chile and Argentina, and also in Cyprus. So that's actually, I think Polio Plus is a big peacemaking project, because many fighting parties have stopped fighting, so we could go in and vaccinate people. And of course, millions of people now live polio free because of Rotary. And if Rotary hadn't started it, I don't know if it would have gotten started the way it did. I look at the distinction between regular education, like we acquire knowledge through our schools and colleges, but I think we gain wisdom in Rotary, because we are together with other people who want to give back to society. And I think that's very rewarding and enriching. And I don't think it's a coincidence that Rotary 116 years later has still it remains relevant with almost 1.2 million members. Social justice is very important in peacemaking. For example, internally, I believe that the key to success is to maximize our intellectual resources. And of course, women represents 50% of our intellectual resources. So more equality with women, among women, with women is good for our economy. Minorities represents 20 to 30%. And but diversity is a major reason for Rotary's success around the world. And Rotary's founder, Paul Harris, said that Rotary stands for tolerance. So I think that is one of the key strengths in Rotary. And Winston Churchill said that America always gets it right after it tried everything that's wrong. And that's pretty much what we're experiencing now. And I think now it's time to get it right. And that's the end of my presentation. And I'm very happy to take questions, and I'm not afraid of tough questions.
Well, your presentation is very informative. What do you do when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor? Were we supposed to go to war or go to peace? And 4 days later, Germany declared, and Italy and others declared war on America. What are we to do?
Well,
there was no United Nations. There was a league, but it didn't work. What are we to do if some bizarre dictator like the Putin of Russia, Putin the poisoner, decide to attack us?
Okay. Shall I consider that one question? Well, obviously, if we're attacked, we have to defend ourselves. And we all lose by doing that. But I'm actually supportive of a strong military because I believe that we need a strong military to preserve the peace and police the peace. My problem was not so much that we have a military. I had problems with how we were using the military, and sometimes for political reasons, you know, every congressman wants to have a military factory in their own district. And I think the military sometimes had to accept things that they really didn't want because of that was decided in Congress for political reasons. But I believe that America is the guarantor of peace around the world because of its strong military.
I'm glad you feel that way. For example, our Navy is second to none. There's nobody like it. We have 11 aircraft carriers. The newest one, it's the Gerald Ford, has a crew of over 6,000. Just think of that. There's no other country that has one like that.
Well, you will find that if you look at the Middle East, where China seemed to have a strategy similar to what I described was relevant in the 1800s, where they now think they're going to build artificial islands to secure raw materials and all of that. All these countries around China, including North Korea actually, are very fearful of China, and they are looking to America to protect them, and Vietnam is an example of that. You know, over the hundreds of years, China has always been an enemy to them. But as long as we had our soldiers there, we became an enemy. And once we withdrew, Vietnam always tried to be our friend. And it only took about 2 years till they were at war with China. So I think that more and more, the more as China becomes belligerent, I think the other countries will seek our protection.
Thank you.
Andy Morzello,
Yeah.
Max, you and I have talked about all of this, and particularly China on many occasions. And I think in the last occasion I mentioned to you, when I was a Rotary Ambassadorial Scholar studying at the University of the Philippines in 1963 and 1964, I had many conversations with Filipinos from the presidency of the country and the presidency of the university, right down to students in classrooms at the university. And the feeling then, and from what my friends in the Philippines tell me today, remains the same, that the fear of China was not because China was communist, but because China, in all of its history, was imperialistic, seeking to dominate. And, you know, when I chatted about that, and I'd just like you to comment for everybody about it in light of what's going on today.
Well, there are actually two Chinas. You have Taiwan and you have the PRC, People's Republic of China. If you look
Well,
at
we're talking
Taiwan,
about the People's Republic of China.
yeah, no, but I'm making a distinction here because Taiwan, in my opinion, is what China should have been if they were democratic, because Taiwan is democratic, and they are pursuing a policy of peace and prosperity. And actually, the leadership of China in the days of the Second World War, they went to Taiwan and they built a different country there. So you can actually compare. If you look at the People's Republic of China, they have a number of provinces that don't really want to belong to China. The Uyghurs, for example, and the Mongolians are definitely not, and the Tibetans, they don't want to be part of China. So compare that with America, where we have 50 states that want to belong together, and so on. So I think the whole idea of conquer and suppress other people, and then they use in what do you call it, artificial intelligence to suppress their people. I think that is going to hurt them in the long run, because in America, we use artificial intelligence to promote our society and to promote our economy. So in the long run, I believe that we will win, because our GMP per capita is going to be higher than when you keep and when you control. And that's my whole idea, that people who live in peace and can promote what they want to do and promote their passions can do that. And in China, they can't. You always have the heavy hand of the authority looking at you. And of course, when I traveled to South Korea, and we flew through Shanghai, and I was reading the literature on this Eastern China Airlines. they said that China will develop under the wisdom of the Communist Party. Well, I traveled a lot in communist countries, and I think anybody who has experience of communist countries know how good that wisdom is, and it's not good at all. So I think it's counterproductive to China, and I believe that we will persevere against China because of our freedom, and China will lose out in the long run.
Thank you.
Any other question?
Yeah. Mats, it's Jill. I saw many of your slides where you and your wife were meeting with world leaders and important people who are interested in your project and in peace. How do you get the word out to non-governmental organizations such as terrorist organizations that it's much better for us to be peaceful than not?
Well, it's not an overnight success, of course. You're not going to be able to convince people overnight. It takes time. And even when you're face to face with people and you make suggestions, there's a natural instinct with people to be resistant. And I mean, I've experienced that even in Rotary. If I sit in a Rotary meeting and I make some ideas, present some ideas, and because people instinctively don't like change. But then I've noticed that maybe a year later or 2 years later, they come up with the same idea, and now they think it's their idea, and they forgot that I mentioned it. But that's fine, you know, as long as the job gets done.
Right.
I think we're in the business of planting seeds and being out there and speaking, and hopefully more people will then and we've been well received. I mean, everybody hasn't some people have refused to talk to us, but but there hasn't been any hostility. But we're being well received, and we're always very respectful, of course. We respect other people's opinion, and we believe that our opinion is going to win out in the long run. But it's a long-term project. But I think the world is moving in that direction.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Anyone else have questions for Matt?
I have a question. This is Stan Hers. I'm a visiting Rotarian.
Hi, Stan.
You're assuming that people, can you hear me?
I can hear you very well.
Okay, thank you. You're assuming that people are rational, but what's the prospect of peace? What's the prospect of peace with people who are waging a holy war? They're listening to God and no one else. And how can you deal with people like that?
Well, I don't assume that people are rational. I believe that most people act in their own self-interest once they are convinced, based on what they believe to be their self-interest. For example, the peace movement has always claimed that it's more better to believe in peace than in war. And I believe that too, but I believe that the majority of people will act in their own self-interest. And of course, we Rotarians have joined Rotary because we want to give back to society. But in order to win an argument with other people, it's better to point out that their peace is in their self-interest, which is actually true. Peace is in their self-interest, and the facts support that. Of course, when you are dealing with religious fanatics, what I found is that, let's say Afghanistan, for example, we have a friend that is a retired Afghani diplomat, and he's also Rotarian. And he said to me that the way to get peace in Afghanistan is to deal with the tribal elders. And in the Muslim culture, if you're invited as a guest, they will do anything for you. to please you. If you come uninvited, they may kill you. Well, if you come with bombs and planes and machine guns, you're not invited. So I would say, and the Taliban's actually now they are winning more and more people over in Afghanistan, and they're contacting the tribal elders and as being invited by them, and that's really the secret to winning them over in Afghanistan. Now, I've traveled in Uzbekistan, for example, which is a culture very similar to that one in Afghanistan. And what I found was that the elders or the older elder, they want what's good for their young generation, education, prosperity, and so on. And if you can talk to the elders in the tribes, then and convince them that healthcare, vaccination, and so on is good for the next generation, then they're willing to listen. It doesn't mean they immediately will accept it, but they will respect me for having talked to them in a respectful manner. So that's the road to answer your question.
Yeah, thank you.
So are you
Yeah.
likely to be the main figure of the movement, or do you have a team working with you? And how well you think you have your feet on the ground?
Philip, I'm glad you were able to log in. He's a member of my club.
Thank you.
Now, well, I'm not striving to be the leader of a movement per se. I may be, but if I'm the leader of a movement, that's because other people want me to be a leader of a movement. But
Yes.
the whole purpose is to convince people that it's in their self-interest to have peace.
Mhm.
And it's not important for me to be the leader. In fact, I stay away from publicity. I stay away from being in the front line because I think diplomacy behind the scenes is more effective than diplomacy by Twitter or in the front, because you want to give in fact, in diplomacy, it's very important to have a good friendly relationships with other diplomats, even if the countries are enemies. For example, Henry Kissinger and Zhou Enlai, they were personal friends, even though their countries were mortal enemies. So I find that diplomacy behind the scenes work much better than, and then the politicians can sort of take the credit for the decisions they make.
Mhm. Yeah,
Okay.
I think there's no problem at all that you are the leader of the group, because you are doing a good job. But I'm only asking if you have a team, working with you.
Well, we have a team. It's getting bigger and bigger, and we've had positive influences in Israel, for example, and with Iran, and we may have had something to do with the change of government in Israel, but it's too early to tell. But I'm not here to take credit for that. I'm more interested in seeing the job done.
Thank you.
Ted Weizenberg, did you have a question? I thought I saw your hand up.
Yes. Hi, Mats. How are you?
Fine.
I can speak to the fact that you like to be behind the scenes. When I first met you, you insisted that you were really nobody and you were just Sandra's driver.
That was true. That was true that day, actually.
But my question was, you raised the issue of minorities, and on a global scale, all Americans are a minority. Certainly white Americans are a minority. White men are a minority. So, there are more Chinese than there are Americans, period. So in your travels in different countries, what have you found of interest of groups that were considered minorities?
Well, we're all minorities if you look at it on a global scale, of course. I was born.
There's only 1.2 million Rotarians, we're a minority.
Yeah. Well, of course, I come from a country with 10 million people, so Swedes are minorities also. But I think if you look at, let's say, Chinese that come to America, they do very well in America, much better than they do in China. So I think it's the system, and I have no problem that everybody is a minority, because we're actually all human beings, and we all share very much the same values. To me, it's not. My point was that we shouldn't discriminate against anybody, not because, well, of course, it's not the right thing to discriminate against anybody, but it's also in our self-interest to utilize the intellectual resources that the minorities or what's considered minorities can provide. Let's take, for example, the Moderna vaccine. That was developed by a Black woman. And if she didn't have an opportunity to get an education, we may not have had the Moderna vaccine developed. So, and of course, Albert Einstein, he left Germany and came to America because it was not safe for a Jewish scientist to live in Germany. So we benefited from that, and America took the lead after the Second World War. So I think promoting, and of course I've heard stories about African-American women who helped out with the mathematics on our space projects. So I believe that educating our minorities add to our intellectual resources, and it's good for our country. I think most people who are saying that whites' privilege is going to be disappearing and all of that, they think of the pie as specific, that it's a win-lose, it's a zero-sum game. If somebody else wins, other people lose. I think America's history shows that we're all part of an ever-growing pie, and the pie is bigger today than it was 50 years ago. And we all benefit from that. And it's good for our economy by having equality and give everybody an equal opportunity. And that's including education, you know. Education to me is not a privilege. It's actually, it's not an expense. If you look at it from a national economy point of view, it's not an expense. It's really an investment in our intellectual resources. And even if the government pays for all our education, that's an investment that the government makes, that they will be, as a government and our country, it will be rewarded for, because it will come back, the benefits will come back to our country and our nation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I concur.
All right. Does anyone, we're getting close to time when we typically break up. Does anyone have any, one final question for Matt, or?
I see Daisy.
I just wanted to say, Matt, I think you're wonderful. I think it's really amazing what you're doing. I am, yeah, just fantastic, and all the best to you, you know.
Thanks. Yeah, agreed.
Thank you.
Agreed. Well, we've been very fortunate. I guess one last thing before, Matt, you have several people on. I didn't get a chance to introduce guests, and many of them I don't know. So let me just acknowledge that we have a number of people on, I think, owing to Matt's appearance to be our guest speaker today. I guess Sandra Lee, I think, is Matt's partner. Am I have that right?
Yeah,
Yep.
we've been married for a number of years.
Very good. Welcome, Sandra. And then Daisy Jopling, I think. Where are you joining us from?
Peekskill Rotary Club.
Oh, very good. And Philippe Charles, where are
Yes.
you joining us from?
From the Rotary Club of Yonkers, East Yonkers.
It's
Yonkers.
my Rotary Club.
Welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
Mine too.
And Sandra's too, yeah.
You're in Yonkers? Yeah.
Yeah.
And Stan Hertz Perlman, you're in California?
I'm on the Rotary Club in the Northern Palm Beaches in Florida.
Oh, excellent. Wonderful. Welcome, welcome. Come any Well, Tuesdays, we're hopefully going to be live, but it's great to have you. And Michael Henstra, you're in California?
I'm in California. I'm a 41-year Rotarian, and I'm currently a member of the Rotary E-Club of Innovation.
Okay, it seems like Michael froze in the middle, but welcome, Michael. And I think I covered everyone who seems to be a guest. So,
Libby Holland raised her hand.
oh,
Yeah, I just was going to ask Matt if he could tell us how to find the Facebook page he referred to.
Okay, you can actually go on Facebook and type in Rotary Grassroots Peacemaking, and you will have a Facebook page that says Rotary Grassroots Peacemaking, PDG Mats Ingemanson. Now, my name is not on there because I like to promote myself. It's on there because Rotary International insists on me putting my name on there, because if I put in Rotary Grassroots Peacemaking, they would not accept it. So, but that's how you find my Facebook page.
Great, thank you.
great, yeah. Well, I think this has been a very enlightening discussion, and certainly I'm hoping that White Plains Rotarians can think about these issues that we've been talking about. Take a look at the Facebook page Matt's just pointed us to, and help us figure out ways that we can become involved in this endeavor, along with Matt's and the others who've been working with him. So yes, Sandra, please.
Whenever we go to different places, we try and stop by a Rotary Club. And in that way, we meet different people from all over the world. And in doing that, we can increase our project.
Great,
At least.
very good. All right, anyone else have anything else to share? What we'll do is I'll ring the bell and we will adjourn the formal meeting, but we'll keep we'll keep the Zoom meeting open. And people can stay on for as long as they like and talk about this or anything else. So I thank you very much, Matt. It's been terrific having you, and we'll formally adjourn, but again, don't feel you have to sign right off if you don't want. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Matt. It was a
thank you for
pleasure.
inviting me.